The remote made a soft click, and the warm chatter of the television faded into silence. For a moment, the quiet felt gentle, like a blanket settling over the house, but that comfort was shattered the instant he walked in. I sat in my old mahogany armchair, the one I bought with my first widow's pension after my husband passed away 20 years ago. A cup of chamomile tea was cooling on the table beside me. The scent of baked apples still lingered from the cobbler I made earlier. This hour of the day, just before dusk, was the thin slice of peace I carved out for myself. Then the front door slammed. I didn't need to look. Only one person in this house treated a door like an opponent to overpower. Robert Carson, my son-in-law, my daughter Helen's husband, a man who moved into my home 4 years ago and immediately behaved as though he were the one who had built it brick by brick. His shoes thudded across the hardwood floor like arrogant punctuation marks. Behind him, Helen followed, carrying a few shopping bags with her shoulders drawn up as though she were bracing for a storm. Her eyes stayed low, always downcast these days, as if avoiding the truth might make it disappear. Rob stopped in front of the TV, blocking my view. Not accidentally, never accidentally. He stared at me with that sideways smirk he wore whenever he felt powerful. "Time up, Margaret," he said. "I've got the game tonight. This," he tapped the screen, "is my living room now. Go to your room." My fingers tightened around the armrests. Not in fear, my fear had dried up long ago, but in something heavier, something colder. I turned my eyes to Helen. All I needed was a word. A single word. "Don't speak to my mother like that. This is her home." Anything. But Helen kept her gaze glued to the shopping bags in her hands. The way her fingers twisted the paper handles was the only sign that she was alive inside her own silence. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It cut far cleaner without volume. I rose slowly, my knees clicking like old clockwork gears. The sound seemed to echo through the room, far louder than Rob's shouting somehow. I didn't argue, didn't sigh, didn't make a single plea. I simply walked past him. "Yeah," he called after me, sprawled on the couch he didn't own. "That's right, finally listening." I reached my bedroom. Not to hide, not to surrender, but to retrieve something I hadn't touched in years. A leather pouch containing my documents. And beneath that, my folder of deeds, receipts, and ownership papers. My name, Margaret Whitford, printed again and again across pages that held more authority than 1,000 shouts. I stood before the mirror. A tidy woman with short silver hair and glasses on a chain stared back at me. A grandmotherly figure. A woman who baked pies and remembered birthdays and tied ribbons on Christmas gifts. But she was also the woman who had worked decades in a records office, filing and correcting property documents. And that woman had awakened. I tucked the papers under my arm, took my keys, and stepped out of my bedroom, out of the house, without looking back. Rob snorted as I passed the living room. "Taking a walk at this hour, try not to get lost." But I wasn't walking. I was leaving. Outside, the evening air was crisp and clean, a shocking contrast to the heaviness inside the house. I locked the front gate from the outside, the metal clinking like a seal of finality. I didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. A cab pulled up, as if summoned by resolve itself. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "The Fairmont Hotel downtown," I replied. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, steady, cool, almost formal, like the voice I used to use when signing official documents. As we drove through the glowing streets, I scrolled through my old contacts until I found his name. Charles Winford, attorney at law. A man who had once told me, "If you ever need help reclaiming your boundaries, Margaret, the law is sturdier than people." When he answered, his tone turned alert at once. "Margaret, at this hour, what happened?" "I need help," I said. "Tomorrow morning, it's urgent." "And what is the matter?" "I intend to evict 2 tenants," I replied. "Effective immediately." There was a long pause. Then, "Tell me everything." And I did. By the time the cab pulled up to the hotel, The first step of my plan had already begun. But none of them, neither Rob nor Helen, had any idea. Tomorrow they would. And the first knock on the door would not be mine. Tomorrow morning, a sharply dressed man will arrive at Margaret's front gate carrying a document that will turn the entire house upside down. But what happens inside that home when the law knocks, before Margaret even returns? The morning light fell gently across the hotel room, turning the curtains gold. I woke before my alarm, not because of worry, but because clarity has its own clock. I dressed in the same neatly pressed clothes from the night before, tied my hair back, and left the Fairmont with a straightened posture I hadn't felt in years. At precisely 8:00 a.m., I stepped inside the office of Charles Winford, my lawyer. His reception area smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Charles, dignified in a charcoal suit, greeted me with the respectful nod only a man of discipline could give. "Everything is prepared," he said. "My associate Matthew Crane is already en route to your house." Matthew, quiet, precise, with a reputation for delivering news firmly without cruelty, carried with him the notice to quit, a document that looked deceptively simple. A few paragraphs, a signature, yet it held the power to rearrange a household. I sat with Charles as he reviewed the papers one final time, a ritual of perfection. "Now we wait," he said. "Their reaction will be significant." But he didn't know Rob. He didn't know how significant. Meanwhile, in the house I had left behind, the sun had barely risen when someone pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed through the hallway like it had never sounded before, sharp, impatient, official. Helen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, opened the door. A man in a crisp navy suit stood before her, briefcase in hand. "Good morning," he said courteously. "I'm Matthew Crane, legal representative for Mrs. Margaret Whitford. I have documents for Mr. Robert Carson and Ms. Helen Whitford." Helen blinked, as if he had spoken a foreign language. "My mother, she isn't here." "I'm aware." Rob stumbled out of the hallway wearing a wrinkled t-shirt, still half asleep. "Who the hell are you?" he barked. Matthew didn't flinch. "Mr. Carson, this is a legal notice. You are being formally requested to vacate the property within 30 days. Rob snatched the papers with a scoff, scanning the first lines with growing disbelief. "What kind of joke is this?" he snapped. His voice rose, his face turned red. "Eviction, she can't do this. This is my home." "Mr. Carson," Matthew said calmly, "the property belongs solely to Mrs. Whitford. You have no lease, no rental contract, and no legal right to remain if the owner revokes permission." Helen's hands shook as she opened her own copy. Her eyes darted over the words like a terrified student reading a verdict. "Rob," she whispered, It's real, she signed it." But Rob's pride was louder than Helen's trembling voice. "She can't throw us out," he shouted. "We've lived here for years, that means something." "Not in the eyes of property law," Matthew replied. "Your residency was at her goodwill. She has terminated that goodwill, as is her right." The living room, my living room, filled with tension so thick it felt suffocating. Rob slammed his hand against the wall. "I want to speak to her." "You may contact her attorney," Matthew said. "Further communication must go through him." Helen pressed her hands to her mouth, shaking as she listened to Rob packing back and forth, muttering curses about ungrateful old women and dramatic stunts. Then suddenly, he screamed. "Where is she?" Helen swallowed hard. She left last night, Rob. She took her purse, her keys. She didn't say where." Matthew cleared his throat gently. "One more thing. Utilities in her name may be temporarily suspended at her discretion." Almost on cue, a faint beep came from the modem in the hallway. The internet light flickered, then died. The silence that followed was deafening. Rob stared at the modem as if it had personally betrayed him. "You've got to be kidding me," he snarled. "She shut off the Wi-Fi. I have a conference call at 10. She's insane." Helen backed away from his anger. She looked at the notice again, her face draining of color. We have 30 days, she whispered. Rob, she means it. She really means it. Matthew closed his briefcase softly. Good day. Please read the documents thoroughly. Your timeline begins now. And with the same calmness with which he had arrived, he left them standing in the doorway, one furious, the other frightened, holding the pieces of a reality they had never imagined. Back at Charles Winford's office, my phone vibrated. Helen calling. The screen lit up again and again. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Mama, Helen cried, her voice cracking. There's a man here, Matthew, and Rob is screaming. The internet is gone. What is happening? Where are you? I held the phone slightly away from my ear. Read the notice, Helen, I said. Everything is written there. You're evicting us, she gasped. Mama, have you lost your mind? No, I replied softly. For the first time in years, I've found it. I ended the call. The silence after her voice disappeared felt cleaner than fresh air. With utilities shutting down and legal deadlines ticking, tensions escalate dangerously inside the house. But Margaret's next move, financial, quiet, and devastating, will hit harder than any document. The reception area of Charles Winford's law office was too quiet for the storm brewing several miles away in my house. I sat in a leather armchair with a paper cup of machine coffee warming my hands. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second carving deeper the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. My phone vibrated again. Helen, then Rob, then both. I placed the phone face down on my lap. Charles stepped out of his office with a folder tucked under his arm. Matthew reported in. Service of notice was successful. I nodded calmly. And now, I said, we move to step 2. He raised an eyebrow. Financial. Yes. This was the part no mother wants to do. But this wasn't about motherhood anymore. This was about boundaries, dignity, and decades of my work being treated like a doormat. I opened my purse and took out a small notebook, the one where I kept every bill paid, every transfer made, every unnecessary expense I had quietly covered for the sake of keeping a fragile peace. I smoothed the pages with a steady hand. When you've lived carefully, I said to Charles, you know exactly where to pull the plug. He smiled faintly, not out of amusement but recognition. Tell me what needs to be done. I took a deep breath. Everything in my name, suspend it. Internet, cable, landline, and the supplementary card Helen uses for groceries. Not canceled, just frozen. I'll turn them back on when the house is mine again. He nodded with professional approval. That will send a message. It's not a message, I said. It's an accounting correction. While Charles drafted the instructions, I stepped into the hallway and made the first call. AT the house. The freezer hummed weakly. Then stuttered. Then the electricity surged, but only enough to remind them something was wrong. Rob, already seething from the eviction notice, furiously tapped the Wi-Fi router like physical force might convince it to resurrect. What now? He barked. The cable's gone too, Helen whispered from the kitchen, holding her phone. My card declined at the butcher. Rob, I can't even buy groceries. You're telling me we don't have internet, cable, or a working card, Rob yelled. What is she doing? Waging war. Helen sank into a chair, staring at her phone screen as if it could explain the actions of a woman they both underestimated. She turned everything off, she said weakly. No, Rob growled, packing like a caged animal. I won't be treated like this. I'll tell her exactly. His voice cracked with fury. Where are you going? Helen asked. To find her, he spat. But he didn't know where I was. Because for years, I had been the easy one to find. The one always at home. The one glued to routines that made me predictable. Not anymore. Back at the law office. My second call was to the bank. Good afternoon, I said politely. I'm the primary account holder for the Whitford accounts. I'd like to temporarily suspend the supplementary card ending in 9021. Limit access to my number only. No shared notifications. Of course, Mrs. Whitford, the banker said. Would you like us to update online access as well? Yes, I said. Reset all passwords, only my number on file. Within minutes, years of convenience dissolved into boundaries. These weren't acts of cruelty. These were acts of responsibility, long overdue. Charles came over with a fresh printout. All utilities and services in your name will be suspended within 2 hours. Good, I said softly. Let the house feel my absence. I tucked the papers back into my notebook. For the first time in years, the numbers finally belonged to me again. Lunchtime. I walked 2 blocks toward the Gallery Mall and entered a clothing boutique with soft lighting and quiet music. A young associate with kind eyes asked if I needed help. I need something that feels like armor, I said. She guided me to a rack of classic pieces. Straight-leg black trousers, a crisp white blouse, a pale beige blazer that felt like structure stitched into fabric. In the fitting room, I stood under the bright light, staring at the woman in the mirror. Her shoulders were no longer rounded with exhaustion. Her face was no longer waiting for permission. Her silver hair looked almost regal against the clean lines of the blazer. This was Margaret Whitford, the version of me buried beneath years of swallowed words. I walked out of the store wearing the new outfit. My old clothes were folded into a bag for donation. At the cafe upstairs, I ordered mushroom risotto and a glass of white wine. I placed my phone face down on the table. A few minutes later, the first text arrived. D. Sileni D. $85 butcher shop. Then another. Margaret, what have you done? Answer me. Rob. I took a spoonful of risotto and let the taste settle on my tongue. Then another message. Mama, please call me. Helen. I set the phone aside and continued eating in silence. Today, my silence was the answer. Next comes the first confrontation, face to face. Helen arrives at the hotel in a frantic state, and Margaret must speak the hardest truths a mother ever speaks. The lobby of the Fairmont Hotel was quiet except for the soft hum of jazz drifting from hidden speakers. Crystal chandeliers reflected gentle circles of light across the marble floor. I had just returned from the mall, feeling lighter and steadier in my new clothes, when the landline in my room rang. Mrs. Whitford, the receptionist said, your daughter is downstairs. She's asking to see you. There was urgency in her voice, pleading, near frantic. I sighed softly, not in frustration, but in understanding. Every consequence had finally reached its mark. I'll come down, I replied. I smoothed the lapel of my beige blazer, checked the chain of my glasses, and breathed once, a long, steady breath that felt like closing the door on years of swallowed words. Then I stepped into the elevator. The doors slid open to reveal Helen, packing in the lobby. Her usually neat hair was a messy knot, her blouse wrinkled, a purse strap twisted from anxious hands. She looked like a woman who had spent the morning trying to hold back a flood with bare fingers. When she saw me, she stopped mid-stride. Her eyes widened. I realized she had not expected to see me like this, calm, standing tall, dressed with purpose instead of resignation. Mama, she whispered. I motioned to an armchair in the corner. Sit, we'll speak calmly. This is a dignified place. She obeyed immediately, perched on the edge like a frightened child waiting for bad news at a doctor's office. Mama, what is all this? She burst out. The internet is gone, the cable is gone, the card is frozen, Rob is losing his mind. Why are you doing this? Why now? I sat across from her, folding my hands neatly. I am restoring order, I said. The house is mine, the bills are mine, and the goodwill I extended for 4 years has expired. Helen blinked rapidly, her breathing shallow. But this is our home too, she protested. Rob works there, he has meetings. People will think. What people think, I interrupted gently, is not my responsibility. Respect is. She flinched at the word, as if it were a stone thrown lightly, but precisely. Mama, he apologized, she insisted. He texted you, isn't that enough? No, I said simply. A text after years of disrespect is not repentance, it's panic. Helen swallowed hard. You're embarrassing us, she whispered. Everyone in the store saw my card decline. The cashier looked at me like I was. Welcome to what I have endured quietly for years, I said. Being told to go to my room in my own home, having my living room stolen, being reduced to silence. Tears gathered in her eyes. But Rob didn't mean it, she tried again. You know how he gets. He was stressed yesterday. I leaned forward, my voice calm, even unshakably firm. Helen, a man's stress is not paid for with a woman's dignity. Her shoulders sagged, as if those words had physically pressed on her. She tried one more angle, soft, pleading, the voice she had used as a little girl asking for 5 more minutes before bedtime. Mama, can we please go home? You come back, the internet goes on, the card starts working, and we talk everything out over tea, like we always do. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. That routine is exactly why nothing changed, because every problem was swept under the rug with tea and silence. She looked up, eyes red. You're choosing to break this family. I am choosing, I corrected, to stop being broken in it. The sentence hung in the air like a bell tolling. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. I let her cry. Crying was not weakness, it was clarity knocking. After a moment, she spoke. Rob says if we leave your house, he'll divorce me. My heart clenched, not from fear, but from recognition. And what do you want? I asked softly. She didn't answer. Silence can tell the truth more than words ever could. I placed my hand gently over hers. If your marriage survives only by living under my roof and on my bank account, I said, then it is not a marriage, it is a hostage situation. She let out a small, broken gasp, like she had finally heard something she secretly knew, but never dared to acknowledge. But I have nowhere to go, she cried. You have everywhere to go, I said. You work, you earn, you are capable, you can rent an apartment, sell the crossover, begin again. She sniffed, wiping her eyes. And what about you? She whispered. I smiled faintly. For the first time in years, I am exactly where I need to be. Helen looked at me long and hard, really seeing me, perhaps for the first time since she married Rob. She rose slowly. I'll be there tomorrow, she whispered. At the lawyer's office, 10 o'clock. That's the right decision, I said. She stepped back, glanced at my poised stance, the blazer, the confidence, and whispered. Mama, when did you become so strong? I met her eyes. I didn't become strong, Helen. I just stopped being quiet. She walked out of the lobby like a woman, carrying a cracked truth she could no longer ignore. Tomorrow's meeting will bring Robert, Helen, and the law into one room. The truth about their finances, their lies, and their marriage will come crashing down. And Margaret will deliver the final words that change everything. The conference room at Winford and Crane Legal Associates smelled of polished wood and cold air conditioning, like truth preserved under glass. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in my beige blazer, my documents neatly stacked before me. Sitting at the head of the long table, I felt no tremor, no hesitation, only readiness. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the door opened. Charles Winford entered first, steady and composed. He took the seat to my right. Then the paralegal poked his head in. They're here, he whispered. And in walked the storm. Robert Carson looked nothing like the king of my living room. His shirt was wrinkled, hair uncombed, his usual swagger replaced with a nervous twitch in his jaw. Behind him, Helen followed quietly, eyes down, fingers laced tightly around the strap of her purse. Sit, Charles instructed, his tone carrying the authority of someone used to people obeying. Rob yanked out a chair and slumped into it. Helen lowered herself gently, as though bracing for an impact. I watched them both without hostility, without triumph, just clarity. Rob slammed the eviction notice on the table. This, he snapped, is ridiculous. You can't kick us out like criminals. We've lived there for 4 years. We have rights. I met his glare calmly. Rights, I said, come with responsibilities. You exercised neither. He scoffed. I know the law. There's something called adverse possession. We lived openly in the house. We treated it as ours. I almost pitied him, not for his ignorance, but for believing confidence could replace knowledge. I worked in property records for 35 years, I replied. Adverse possession doesn't apply when the owner pays the bills, lives in the home, and repeatedly exercises control. You were guests, loud ones. Rob's mouth opened, then closed. Charles slid a document toward him. The notice is valid, properly served. Your deadline stands 30 days. Rob slapped the table. This is illegal. Charles didn't blink. It's perfectly legal. Helen flinched at the rising tension. She looked at me with pleading eyes. Mama, she whispered, please, isn't this too harsh? I reached for a second folder and pushed it gently toward her. Helen, I said softly, read this. She opened it, hands trembling. Inside were 3 loan default notices, a negative brokerage statement, and overdraft transactions, all attached to Rob's accounts. Her breath hitched. Rob lunged for the papers, but Charles blocked him with one decisive hand. Mrs. Whitford has the right to present financial evidence, he said. Helen scanned the documents, each page carving deeper into her expression. No, she whispered. No, Rob, these can't be real. You said we had savings. You said money was growing. Rob's voice cracked with defensiveness, rather than remorse. I told you I'm investing. The market dipped. It's temporary. It's negative, Helen choked out. It's below 0. Silence crushed the room. I leaned forward gently. Your 4 years of savings should have reached nearly $100,000, I said. But instead it was spent on bad trades, on hobbies, on expensive meat and imported beer, on things my supplementary card paid for. Rob shot to his feet. You're twisting this. Families help each other. Families respect each other, I corrected, and you offered none. His eyes burned with rage. I'm your son-in-law. You are a grown man, I replied. You chose to shout at me, belittle me, and claim ownership of what isn't yours. That ends today. Rob's confidence finally cracked. His knees weakened. He sank back into his chair. Charles folded his hands. The terms, he announced firmly. 30 days to vacate, no utilities restored, no supplemental cards reinstated, and if Mrs. Whitford reports any threats or harassment, she will file immediately with law enforcement. Rob looked like he'd been punched. Helen's eyes filled with tears, this time not from fear, but realization. What do I do now? She whispered, barely audible. You live, I said. You begin again. She wiped her cheeks. I don't know how. You will, I said. Strength grows in clean air. Rob suddenly slammed his palm on the table again. This is all her fault. She's destroying our marriage. Helen looked at him with a calmness I hadn't seen in years. No, Rob, she said quietly. You did that yourself. His face froze. I'm not going home with you, Helen continued, voice trembling but steady. I need space. I'm going to a friend's house tonight. He stared at her in disbelief. You're choosing her over me, he spat. No, she whispered. I'm choosing myself. Rob stormed out, leaving the door swinging behind him. The silence afterwards felt like the first clean breath after standing too long in smoke. Helen turned to me. Mama, I'm scared. I reached across the table and took her hands. Fear, I said, is the first step of freedom. Keep walking. She nodded. And she did. Epilogue, 1 month later. Helen signed the divorce papers. She moved into a small studio apartment she paid for herself. She started therapy. She came over for tea, as a guest, not a tenant. My house became warm again, peach-painted walls, open windows, Wednesday tea meetings with neighbors where we discussed wills, passwords, and boundaries. I wasn't just living in my home again. I was living in myself again.